It's just massive. It's unbelievably large. It's 481.4 feet tall now. It was taller in ancient times. Its base covers 13 acres. It's 756 feet on each side. And when you walk around, it's 0.6 of a mile to go all the way around the pyramid. I did that. The pyramid has 2.5 million granite or limestone blocks, and each one weighs between 2 and 70 tons. If you wanted to build a fence around France, you could build a fence 6 feet tall. Now, I'm not sure why you would want to build a fence around France. Some people might think that was a good idea. But it's a very huge building. There's 201 tiers high. And how was it built? We still don't know. There are lots of theories, but we still don't know. Well, it was written about by this classical writer, this historian Herodotus, in 440 BC. And at the time he was there, it did not look blocky, steppy, like it does today. Because actually, in the ancient times, the sides of the pyramids were covered with limestone. And instead of them looking like this, they were straight, polished limestone. There are stories that when the sun reflected off the polished limestone of the pyramids, you couldn't look at it with your eyes. It was blinding. It must have been very beautiful. From the graffiti that we find in the Great Pyramid, we know that the pyramids must have been opened during the Greek and Roman period because we find ancient graffiti inside the Great Pyramid. But really, there wasn't a lot of interest in the pyramids during the earliest centuries until about 820 AD. There was a story going around that the Great Pyramid contained treasure. And so it was that a sheik named Al-Mamun came to find the buried treasure. He brought a whole retinue of architects and builders, and they were supposed to find their way in. They looked everywhere, and at this point in time, the limestone was still on it. And so they looked, they could not find their way in, and so what did they do? They just decided to dig right through the side of the pyramid. And they built fires, they threw cold vinegar on it, it cracked the blocks, cracked the rocks, they dug it out with pickaxes, and finally they were able to penetrate the pyramid about 100 feet. That's just unbelievable to me. And believe it or not, they struck another passageway. You know, if I'd have been Al-Mamun that night, I'd have gone out and bought myself $1 million lottery ticket. I mean, can you believe how lucky? So they hit one of the passages. They went down first. They went up, crawled all around the pyramid. They found the empty, what they called Queen's Chamber, and basically called it the Queen's Chamber because it was the smallest one. Finally, they found what's called the Grand Gallery, which leads up to the King's burial chamber, and there they found this. A broken sarcophagus, no gold, no silver, no treasure, no mummy, nothing. There is a story that Al-Mamun, the Berkman were so angry that Al-Mamun buried some treasure in there just to make them happy, just to please them. Well, there's very little interest in the pyramids for the next 1,000 years, for the next 500 years, except that there was found a new use for the Great Pyramid, and that is as a quarry. So if you'd like to today, I've seen this, if you'd like today to see the limestone of the Great Pyramid, go into the city of Cairo and go to a mosque. Because it was during this time that the Muslims mined all this wonderful limestone off the side of the Great Pyramid, and took it in town and built mosques with them. Had Khufu ever been buried here? We don't know. If he was, there's no evidence. But certainly, it was a mausoleum for him. The next serious sign of interest was during the time of Napoleon. Napoleon took a whole army to Egypt and conquered Egypt, or at least he tried to. And he fought a battle in the shadow of the pyramids. It's said that when he was fighting the battle of the pyramids, he looked up at the pyramids and said, "Men, 40 generations are before you. And it's for 40 centuries look down upon you." And actually, I don't know where he came up with his chronology, but that is actually pretty right. That's about how old the pyramids are. When Napoleon was in Egypt, he found the Rosetta Stone, and Sunday night I'm going to tell you everything you ever wanted to know about the Rosetta Stone, but was afraid to ask. So that's Sunday night. They found it while they were there. There were a few others that came along who studied the pyramids. There was a guy named John Taylor who was a mathematician, and he wrote a whole book about how the pyramid was built on the value of pi. And then another one named Piazza Smith, who wrote a book about the Great Pyramid. He did measurements, and the conclusion he drew was that the pyramid, the Great Pyramid, was a monument of inspiration, just as the Bible is a book of inspiration. And so he, plus another guy named Robert Menzies, did these intricate measurements and figured out that 1 pyramid inch equaled 1 year of actual time. Just like in the Bible, there's a principle called the year-day principle that in prophecy, 1 day equals a year of actual time. And so Menzies figured that 1 pyramid inch equaled 1 year of time. And so if they would go up this passage, there was another passage that came in, and that predicted the Second World War. Stuff like that. So it was really quite fascinating. Bottom line, none of it was true. It was debunked by a very famous archaeologist whose name is Flinders Petrie. Well, when you go to the pyramids today, you're just fascinated by their size. You go in the passage that was forced by the Sheikh al-Mamun. You go up to the king's chamber through the grand gallery. It's just gorgeous, especially the way they have it lit. Then you can go way down into the depths of the pyramid. You can't anymore. The first time I was there, you could go all the way to the basement of the pyramid. But then you have to find your way out through this little bitty tunnel in the pyramid. If you are claustrophobic at all, don't try it. Because I'm not. And I got claustrophobic. I'm not even claustrophobic. So by the time you get out, there's no air. You're sweating. And then you get out the top and you can see the countryside before you. It's an impressive monument. Why? Because they wanted to memorialize their God King. And this, when you're Pharaoh in Egypt, this is how they treat you. Now, I want to look forward in time for just about 1,000 years later than the time of Cheops. And I see in my mind's eye a young boy whose name is Moses. He's an adopted child. And he's looking up at the Great Pyramid. And he knows that when you're Pharaoh in Egypt, this is the way they treat you. Now, there was a problem with the pyramids. We jump forward 1,000 years in time and come to a time called the New Kingdom. Some 13 dynasties. The annual flooding of the Nile has happened. The land has been enriched. The land has been prosperous. By this time, the pyramid builders are now ancient history. This is the New Kingdom. And this time, at this point, the kings are no longer buried in pyramids. You see, there was a problem with burying the kings in the pyramids. Now, most people have never seen this. But if you look just the right angle, when the sun is shining just at the right angle. Did you see that? You know, there are these signs on the pyramid that say, "Rob me. Rob me." Now, you know I'm kidding, right? But that was the problem. They were hulking "rob me" signs. And so all of the pyramids were broken into, and any treasures that had been put there were stolen probably within a generation of the time the pyramids had been built. And so now they decided to try something different for burial. And so they started burying in what is called the Valley of the Kings. I'm sure some of you have been there, right? Yes. Wonderful place to visit. It's a central valley, and there are 62 known tombs, and it provided good security because there is only one way into the valley, and the valley ends in sheer cliffs back at a place called Deir Bari. And so the valley is very secure. Now, as I say, 62 tombs have been found there, but there's a problem. The problem was also with robbing the tombs. When they look into the ancient tombs they've seen today, it's like reading the who's who of ancient Egyptian history. But each tomb had been plundered in ancient times. Their splendor lost forever. Their secrets never to be found out. Their treasures in someone's collection, like Frank Solomon. That is until 1922. In 1922, one discovery changed the whole thing. Because in 1922, a secret that had been kept for 3,265 years was revealed. His name was Howard Carter. Most of you know who he is. For 6 long years, he had searched for this tomb. I'm going to do a lecture later on with more details, but just want to introduce you to this story. He'd been searching for this tomb for 6 years, but his patron, Lord Carnarvon, had told him this would be the last year. And so he began with renewed effort. It turns out that he had come just within a few feet of discovering this passage several years before. But he had abandoned that dig because they found a big pile of rubble, and basically he didn't want to move it. So it was in 1922, November 4, when he came to the valley that morning. It was a Saturday, and he noticed something strange. There was no singing amongst the workmen. There was not the sound of the pickaxes clinking against the rocks. The digging had stopped. And when he went over, he was shown that they had discovered a step cut in the bedrock. A sure sign of a tomb, but not sure what tomb. They dug down far enough to discover what's called the seal of the necropolis. The seal of the necropolis was, the necropolis is a word for dead city. Necropolis, dead city. And so he discovered this seal of the necropolis, a jackal and 9 captives. If he dug down just a little bit further, he would have discovered the seal of Tutankhamun, but he didn't. So he covered it back up, and he sent a wire to his friend, Lord Carnarvon, and said this. He said, "A most wonderful day I've ever lived through, and certainly one whose like I can never hope to see again." And so Lord Carnarvon came. Now, I want to read to you just a little bit of what Carter says upon opening the tomb. He writes of this day in his diary, and he says this: "Slowly, desperately slowly, it seemed to us as we watched, the remains of the passage debris that encumbered the lower part of the doorway were removed until at last we could see the whole door clear before us. The decisive moment had arrived. With trembling hands, I made a tiny breach in the upper left-hand corner. Darkness and blank space as far as an iron testing rod could reach showed that whatever lay behind was empty and not filled like the passage we had just cleared. Candle tests were applied as a precaution against possible foul gases. And then, widening the hole a little, I inserted the candle and peered in. Lord Carnarvon, Lady Evelyn, and Calendar standing anxiously beside me to hear the verdict. At first, I could see nothing, the hot air escaping from the chamber, causing the candle flame to flicker. But presently, as my eyes grew accustomed to the light, details of the room within emerged slowly from the mist. Strange animals, statues, and gold. Everywhere, the glint of gold. For a moment, an eternity it must have seemed to the others standing by. I was struck with dumb amazement, and when Lord Carnarvon, unable to stand the suspense any longer, said, "Can you see anything?" It was all I could do to get out the words, "Yes, wonderful things." That may have been an understatement. That may have been the greatest understatement in all of archaeology. And oh, what he found. I want to just walk you into the tomb for just a few moments and show you a few pictures of the priceless treasures that he found there. Three times. And every time, I'm in awe. Such beautiful things. Even after 3,000 years, their beauty is unequaled. And as I say in another lecture, I'll talk about the meaning of some of these things. And all of this was for a boy king who reigned only about 10 years, starting at the age of 8, in 1333 to 1323 BC. A relatively minor pharaoh whose pitiful mortal remains were nothing in comparison to the splendor of his tomb. One has to wonder what the great tombs of the pharaohs must have looked like. Altogether, there were more than 5,000 priceless treasures taken from the tomb. It took 9 years to remove the treasures from this tomb. And it is important to me because it's during this time period that I think Moses fits into ancient Egyptian history. So let me explain to you why. And Moses understood that when you are in Egypt, when you're Pharaoh in Egypt, this is how they treat you. In 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 1, we read a text that's very important. It says, in the 480th year after the Israelites had come out of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, the 2nd month, he began to build the temple of the Lord. So here's a chronological text that's very important. And you would say, well, if you could figure out what the 4th year of the reign of King Solomon is, we could establish the date of the Exodus. And we can do that, actually. There's actually a Seventh-day Adventist scholar whose name was Thiele, who did all of this research, and he discovered that the 4th year of the reign of Solomon was 970 BC. And so it's a simple addition. 480 years before that would take you to 1450 BC. Now, as we look at Egyptian history, is there something that happened in 1450 BC that could fit into this topic? And here's something interesting. The ancient Egyptian records tell us that a pharaoh by the name of Thutmose III died in the year 1450. And we don't know why he died. We don't know why he died or how he died. And so if the Exodus happened, let me read this text. It says, Moses was 80 years old and Aaron 83 when they spoke to Pharaoh. So if the Exodus happened in 1450 and Moses was 80 years old when the Exodus happened, then we find out that Moses was born in 1530 BC. It's just simple chronology, and it works well. Exodus 1:22 tells us something about that time period. It says, Pharaoh gave this order to all his people, every boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. And so there is a death decree for boys to be killed. Evidently, Pharaoh was afraid they would form an army and overthrow the Egyptian government. And so we find out that 1530, there's a Pharaoh whose name is Thutmose I. And Thutmose, therefore, when you reconstruct this chronology, is the Pharaoh who made the death decree. All the baby boys must be killed. But there's something funny and interesting about Thutmose I. He did not have a male heir, and he had a daughter whose name was Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut. Now, it's an interesting story. I'm sure you all have heard that story about about Amram and Jochebed, who have a little boy. They don't want to have him killed, and so they hide him until his voice gets so loud they can no longer hide him. And then they put him in a reed basket lined with pitch so that they can put him on the river, hoping that someone might save him. His sister Miriam placed him in the river and stayed a short distance away, and she heard someone coming. And who was it? It was the daughter of the Pharaoh, the Bible tells us. And the reconstruction I've shared with you, it's a woman named Hatshepsut. Now, it's an interesting name he has, Moses. And we're told in Scripture that the word Moses means drawn out of the water. I think Hatshepsut knew the story, and yet she adopted this boy to come into her family. Hatshepsut is a very fascinating figure in Egyptian history. She is not an Egyptian queen. She is an Egyptian king. Now, she didn't have hormone problems and didn't grow that beard. It was a fake beard. And so she became Pharaoh of Egypt, the king of Egypt. She has a brother whose name is Thutmose III by another father. So we have Thutmose III and we have Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut is a very radical figure in Egyptian history. Later on, after she died, they went around and tried to chisel her name out of every monument because a woman could simply not be Pharaoh. They couldn't do that. And so we have this story. It continues in Acts 7:21 through 23. When he was placed outside, he being Moses, Pharaoh's daughter took him and brought him up as her own son. Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and action. When Moses was 30 years old, he decided to visit his fellow Israelites. This is fascinating to me. As smart as we are today, we don't know how they built the pyramids. Moses knew. Thousands of years ago. He was educated. He was prepared to rule Egypt. He knew the Valley of the Kings. His adopted grandparents were buried in the Valley of the Kings. He passed by the shadow of the great Sphinx. He saw all the splendors that one can only guess from the ruins of how beautiful ancient Egypt was. And he knew eventually he would be Pharaoh. It would all be his. The palace of the Pharaoh in Memphis would be his. The Valley of the Kings would be his final resting place. He would be enshrined in gold and treasure, just like Tut was. His body would be wrapped in 100 yards of fine linen. But there has never been found the underground burial tomb of Moses. There is no mummy, no tomb painting with his name, no golden death mask. There are no temples with his royal name carved in a cartouche. There are no temple walls that describe his exploits in war. No statues that bear his likeness. His tomb was never built because he never became Pharaoh. Why? Because Moses made a different choice. Hebrews 11:24 and 25 tells us about that choice. It says this: by faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. See, Moses made a different choice. He turned his back on it all. Why? How could he do that? I think there are primarily two reasons. One is ethnic, because he realized that he did not have any blood in line with these Egyptians, that he was an Israelite. But there was also another one, and that is religious. Notice it says that he chose to be with the people of God, his God. How did he know about that? Well, his mother had raised him all those years and had taught him about the God of the Hebrews. And he understood the importance of that. It's a fascinating study I just read recently in which more and more people are turning their backs on the religions in which they were raised. It's an interesting thing that's happening. You know, on surveys, you get this sentence, and it says, "What religion are you?" And you're supposed to write, and the most dominant religion that's being checked today is none. In other words, people don't claim a religion because they think it's outdated. They don't need it. The choices that Moses made speak to us today and challenge our priorities. They challenge us to think about what is most important. What is most important to you? Are you living your life primarily for yourself? Or are you living it for other people? Is your life selfless or is it selfish? I have a friend who says, if you don't have anything to live for, you have no real reason to live. Now, I expected him to say, if you don't have anything to die for, you have no reason to live. That's not what he says. He says, if you don't have anything to live for, you have no real reason to live. Now, what's he mean by that? I think he means simply this. What is it that is your passion? What is it that you like to do? What is it that gets you out of bed in the morning? And I found most of the people I talk to about this, most of them find that what gives them meaning in life is helping other people. Helping take care of other people, serving other people. And so I challenge you. I challenge you to look at the world around you. There are people around us everywhere who need help. There are hungry people around us. And that's not just thousands of miles away. Amen. There are homeless people around us. There are lonely people around us. I know that there are many people in nursing homes who never have even one visitor. We can make a difference. There are children who need adopted grandparents. There are hospitals that need someone just to walk around and hand out newspapers and smile and chat with people in the hospital. There are needs all around us, places where we can make a difference. Do you see them? And if you don't see them, perhaps that is the greatest tragedy. You're not paying attention. Hebrews continues on about Moses. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. He could have got his reward by being Pharaoh, but he was looking forward to another reward. He says, by faith he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. God was his passion. He wanted to follow God more than anything else. I've been told that in this world, serving the Lord may not pay that well, but the retirement plan is out of this world. That's what Moses knew. And so it gave him a different value in life. And as I think about Moses, and I think about his values, I am challenged over and over again with what is really important. And I want to decide to learn the lessons that I can for my life from the sands of the past. Because these programs are on archaeology in the Bible, I always like to pray for my audience when we finish. So I just want to pray that the Lord will give you some wisdom as to how you can serve your fellow man around you. Let's pray. Dear God, I just thank you so much for bringing each person here tonight. And there are so many lessons that we can learn. And so, Lord, I pray that you would help us in this quest to learn from the sands of the past, to learn the great lessons of the Bible characters. And I pray, Lord, that will change how we live. And I pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen. Well, our next lecture is tomorrow night, called The Tale of the Trowel. I also call this The Fascinating World of Biblical Archaeology. And so I think you will enjoy this topic, in which I will actually describe how archaeologists do the work of archaeology. And so each night we'll also be giving away an oil lamp. I have them prepared here. We have the tickets. We're going to draw one. These are actual ancient oil lamps. Since it's the first meeting, this is a particularly nice one. And it dates to what's called the Byzantine period, which is about 400, 500 AD. It's authentic. This is not a replica. Would I have a replica in my collection, Ken? Oh, no. So one of you are going to be able to take this home. I want to make it plain to you, though, that this is the one you get. You can't go out in the cabinets there and have choice. Okay, so this is the one. So let me choose. And the number is 23876. 23876. There it is. Come. There we go. Enjoy it. You'll enjoy using that in teaching. Yes. Won't you? Good. Okay. Make sure you dump those out before the next meeting. I had that happen to me one time. They didn't dump them out between meetings, and so I stepped pulling tickets out. Nobody was there. So that was kind of embarrassing. So thank you so much for coming. I'm going to be at the back door if you have any questions. On this first meeting, we'll have people coming to the second meeting, and so they'll be coming in the center door. So I'm suggesting that when you exit this first meeting, you go out this side door here. You're welcome to browse in the artifact area, or you can just go out the front doors there, and we'll see you tomorrow night. I will also mention to you that we do have worship here tomorrow morning at 10:50. If you would like to join us for that, we'd be very happy to have you. I'll be preaching a sermon tomorrow about misconceptions about God. So you might find that interesting. But if you can't be here for that, we'll see you tomorrow night at 6. Or if you had to come at 7:30, you could come at either one. It wouldn't be any problem at all. Thank you so much.